Hello, and welcome back to the Comrade Coven, a place for community where we explore healing, magic, otherworldly mysteries, plant medicine, and more. I'm your host, Rachel, and I am so grateful the universe has brought you here today. So, today's episode will be a discussion around Our Lady of Guadalupe, her impact on the world and people of different faiths, the Miracle of Tepeyac, and the scientific proof that lies in her Tilma, which still resides in Mexico City to this day. We will be discussing this episode from the lens of both science and faith today, which, if you got a chance to listen to episode 7, where I discussed with my guests their upbringing in the Christian church, this may surprise you. However, I would be remiss not to be sharing this story with you, as I think it is a perfect encapsulation of how beloved and faith combine with proof and evidence. And, growing up Christian, being raised Christian, I wasn't raised Catholic, so I was never really exposed to Mother Mary. I knew who she was. I knew that she was the Blessed Virgin, that she was the one who gave birth to Jesus, but not really, none of this story, that is for sure. And, being in a Mexican family and seeing their beloved faith in the celebration of her, not only as the Mother of God, but as just this divine messenger. And that's the story we're going to dive into today. So I'm really excited to share this with you. I've felt called to share this story on multiple occasions. Prior to Dia de los Muertos, I had planned a trip. We were going to go to Mexico to see the Tilma. And, part of me just kind of resounding, it didn't work out. And part of me resoundingly kind of said, this kind of feels like my doubting Thomas moment, where it's like, I'm not going to get to see this thing or speak to it based on knowing. It's going to be based on the fact that I just feel really called to share this story, and that just kind of keeps coming up for me. So, and there's a science here that I want to explain, and I think that's why I'm so drawn to this story is, faith is one thing, and I think faith is beautiful, but science being behind this is just another and kind of incredible things. So when I kind of started doing research into this a couple years ago, when I was learning about the Miracle of Tepeyac and all of that, there were a lot of resources that were just very like patriarchal driven, very focused on just aspects of the story that I didn't think were as important, about like, watching like Catholic priests tell this story. So I really wanted to tell this story from the frame of lens that captured me, and truly amazed. I'm not part of organized religion at all anymore. It's completely a thing of my past, but this has absolutely given me just a faith that there is something greater, there's something bigger. And, I do believe that still, that there's something greater than all of us out there. But at the same time, I also believe so much in self empowerment. And that's something that I see in the faith that comes from the Virgin Mary, is just that empowerment of your own divine feminine. So, we'll move into segment 1, which is kind of going to be a little bit about the history of Guadalupe and kind of how she's impacted not just Mexico, where the Miracle of Tepeyac happened, but also the whole world. So, starting off, the name Guadalupe is actually Arabic in origin. And I do think that makes sense when you look at the geography of the Bible and Jesus being born in Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is now modern day, it is Palestine. It's the shared state of occupied Palestine. Just to start with the fact that the miracle of her truly being from Palestine, and just the divine feminine nature that she is, she carried the Son of God. And even when you hear that term, the Son of God, whether you consider her to be a God herself or a mortal, she still carried the Son of God. To me, that in so many ways encompasses her as God too, this divine chosen individual who was cohabitating and co-creating with God to make and create Jesus, which, in my opinion, that they are two of the same coin, the divine feminine and the divine masculine. So it's just really cool to see how those two things can come together. Just, her name being Arabic in origin. And then obviously too, we have the celebration of her. She has a whole chapter in the Quran. She is celebrated by the Catholic Church. She is celebrated, even if it's not a focal point, she's still recognized and celebrated by the Christian church, and how she's just revered worldwide. There's been sightings of her worldwide. But with that, I just wanted to kind of bring that into light initially, is just, yes, the story we're focusing on today is how she showed herself to an indigenous peasant in Mexico, but also that there are chapters of her and written about her, and the reverence of her is almost just as celebrated and just as recognized as it is of Jesus. So with that, we'll move into kind of the story of the the Miracle of Tepeyac, which involves Juan Diego and his sightings of the Virgin. So there are many different versions of this story out there. You can hear them from anyone who is from Mexico. Obviously, they still have the Tilma and it still resides in Mexico City. You can hear this story from the Roman Catholic Church. You can hear this story because at the end of the day, the modern Roman Catholic Church still has Mary at the forefront as well. Anyone who finds faith or interest in this story, you can hear a different version of it. And there will be details. There are some really strong details that really stood out to me. So I want to make sure that I'm sharing those in my retelling today. But a lot of the story and the way I'm going to tell it will be condensed, similar to kind of how most stories on the podcast are. Because I really want to, my goal is to share. And if it's interesting to you, cool, you're learning kind of brief highlights from me, you're getting brief bullet points from me. But then if you want to learn more about it, you can dive into it more. That's kind of the point of every single episode is, here's a launching pad, here's a point, here's how it impacted me or someone I know. And here's maybe what might be interesting if you want to keep learning it for yourself. So I do want to share more about the science too and the unexplainable kind of nature that is the Tilma. But we got to get into the backstory of who Juan Diego was and what he was and his sighting kind of before we get into the science. So, because the story itself is what makes it so incredible that this cloak still exists. Really, even with the background of Juan Diego, he's got a whole story of himself. So just to let you know, he's a peasant farmer. He's an indigenous peasant farmer. And we're not going to get anything, we're going to get into a kind of a timeline of his sightings. But I do want to mind y'all again. In my next episode, I do plan on talking about kind of differences between capitalism, socialism, and communism. This is called the Comrade Coven for a reason. So a lot of my principles are foundationally started in shared communal spaces, land back, free Palestine, just to understand where my frame of this story is coming from. And we're here about ritual, we're here about magic, but we're here to share story. I will talk about, a lot about my personal beliefs about colonization, but that obviously has a lot to do with this story too, because again, here we are talking about an indigenous farmer who was a peasant at the time and who was the person that this Blessed Virgin chose to show herself to, this individual, not the priests, not the Roman Catholic priests, not the Spanish priests that came over and colonized, this individual. To this timeline, just bear in mind that in the mind of the people who had colonized this area, the Spaniards that had colonized this area at the time, they had seen this man as so beneath him. And yet again, this is who she chose to show herself to. And how do you, to me, that's just, to me, that's divine motherly love. That's divine feminine love, that to be cast out by man and be loved and seen and accepted and chosen by God. So this story goes back to a 17th century book. It's 36 pages long. It's written in 1649 by Luis Lazo de la Vega, and he was a vicar of the chapel of Our Lady Guadalupe. Now that's still in Tepeyec, which is the same city where these viewings occurred, and based on this historical reading. So in 1543, December 9th, 1543, the peasant farmer Juan Diego, he was out and he was on a hill and he experienced a vision of a young woman at this place called the Hill of Tepeyec, which later that becomes the Villa of Guadalupe, but it's a suburb of common day Mexico City. So According to accounts, this woman was speaking to him in his native language, which is Nahuatl, and the language of his former Aztec empire, mind you. And she identified herself as Mary, the mother of the very true deity. And so she was said to have asked for a church to be put up in that spot, or a shrine in that spot in her honor. And she said, he was to go back, he was to seek out the archbishop, and he was to tell him exactly what happens. And of course, as I was alluding to, the Spanish archbishop, just did not see this man as worth his time of day. He was the bottom of the totem pole. And so Juan Diego sat and waited for him all day and was shooed away. And so she told him, go and tell him. And she had a second showing to him that day, and she insisted to him to go and talk to him because obviously he sat there and waited all day and was ignored. So she had to send him back out. So the next day, Sunday, December 10th, Juan Diego spoke to the archbishop a second time, and his name was Juan de Zamaga. And he instructed him to return to Tepeyec and ask this woman for some sort of truly acceptable, something that was going to be a sign or proof. Because if this peasant was going to take up his time claiming to have seen the Mother of God, she could prove who she was, right? So later that day, he returned to Tepeyec, and Juan Diego saw a third apparition and encountered the same woman. He said, hey, the archbishop did actually give me his ear this time, but he's saying that you need to give him a sign. So we need to have some sort of sign that I can present. And then that will prove to him that you are coming to me so that he will listen to me. So on the next day, Juan Diego's uncle fell ill, which this is now December 11th. And Juan Diego was like, well, I got to go take care of my uncle. I don't have time to go get this sign. And he had consented already to showing up the next day so that she could provide this miracle, but he didn't show up. So in the early hours of December 12th, as his uncle's condition was deteriorating, Juan Diego journeyed in search of a Catholic priest to hear his uncle's dying confession and help minister him on his deathbed. He was very much, this is what his attention was being paid to. So, and he was ashamed because he knew he didn't show up. The Virgin had told him to show up, and he didn't show up where he was supposed to. So she was waiting for him on that hill. He went ahead and said, I'm going to choose a different route. But she still found him. And when she intercepted him, she asked him, where are you going? You were supposed to meet me. And he explained, my uncle is sick and I have to get him, here. He needs to get his last dying wish. And she was like, hey, like kind of giving him a little bit of a hard time, right? Because this is the Mother of God who has shown herself to you multiple times. Clearly she can handle what's going on. So, and these are actually now famous words that are above the door in the Basilica de Guadalupe. And she said to him, no estoy yo aquí, que soy tu madre, which means, am I not here? I whom your mother. So she reassured him that, like, hey, your uncle's going to be recovered. I need you to go ahead and get it together and, like, get this going for me. And so she told him, I need you to go and gather flowers at Tepeyec Hill. And mind you, this is an area that's usually completely barren. It's the middle of December, so it's the middle of dead winter. There's no flowers or roses growing here. But he did what she said. She's already showed up multiple times. She's known where to find him. Obviously, he needs to listen to her. And so this is for me where the story starts to really get incredible, because I think, again, as humans, we all want that proof, right? We want our doubting Thomas to be shown, which, if you don't know the story of doubting Thomas, it's effectively that he didn't believe Jesus had actually died on the cross until he saw his hands and his side. And so I think that's very human. I think that's one of my favorite stories in the Bible for that reason, because we are all human. We all want our proof, right? But here she is. She gave it to him. So, he went and he obeyed her instruction, and he found these Castile roses. And just so you are aware, Castile roses are not a flower that are native to Mexico. And they were blooming there, again, in the stark cold middle of December. And so he found a plant that's not native. He starts arranging them. He puts them, he's got a cactus cloak, it's over his head. It's got a big long front, filling it with his flowers. And so, again, this occurred on December 12th, which is now known, it's the Mexican Day of Reverence, known as the Dia de Guadalupe. And he went and opened his cloak the next day and he dropped them before the Archbishop. And he said, here's these flowers. They don't grow here. This is her miracle. This is her sign for you. And when he dropped his cloak, there it was, the image of her. And this is what I think truly we can believe when we hear this story, you know, to have a physical image, to have the living proof be on display for us all to witness. I don't know. For me, it's hard to say, how can you not somewhat believe in it? And what does it all mean? So this is all the truth. All of this is true. What does this mean? But if you still need more convincing, we're going to go ahead and jump into the next section here, which is going to be more focused on kind of the Tilma itself and how it defies logic and science. So I had watched a YouTube video about the Tilma and it actually had really upset me because I wanted to do this episode specifically because this Roman Catholic priest was just speaking in kind of a super barbaric, racist, sexist, just the language around the whole story was just really not to me a good representation of the feminine love that this story embodies. I just think the science part is really cool. So everyone's faith is their own. To me, this is not me by any means trying to persuade you to become religious or Catholic. I just think it's an incredible story of faith that has scientific proof behind it. So a couple ways just to start out. And if you're not familiar with this photo, if you're watching this, I put a video up on YouTube, but there's a photo of it. Most people are familiar with it. You know, it's a woman. If you've seen it, she's got her hands crossed. She's got them sitting right in front of her chest. She's looking slightly down. There's golden rays of light all around her. She's got a beautiful, ornate, kind of blue-green kind of shawl around her head and back. And that's where we kind of want to start today. So the shawl, which first things first, if again, we've talked about Palestine. And so this would be either maybe a keffiyeh or a hijab that she would be wearing. The scientific analysis that's been done on this piece of the cloak itself, it's shown that there is absolutely zero evidence of human or man-made materials at all on this cloak. That includes the colors, the paint. It's not human-made paint. The sizing, the underdrawings. There's absolutely no indication that this image has been formed by a human hand. The colors are not found in nature, and particularly the luminosity and lack of fading over the last 600 years. They're all made of unknown materials. They're not found in nature. They're not found in traditional art. The pigmentation alone is completely a miracle. And then there's the image in Mother Mary's eyes, which show that the eyes reflect a scene of people, and that includes the bishop and Juan Diego, consistent as if the eyes are alive. And probably one of my it's my favorite detail, is that the stars on Virgin Mary's mantle, her cloak, match the winter constellation in alignment over Mexico City in the exact same spot where she showed herself to Juan Diego in 1531. How do you explain that? How do you explain that? Incredible. And then you have the claims throughout the years, not just that her eyes reflect 13 figures and 2 scenes in both scenes, not just that her name is Guadalupe, which is a word of Arab origin, not that just the image portrays scenes from the book of Revelation, that the Tilma maintains a consistent temperature, the colors have never faded over the years, but also that multiple times there have been destructive forces that have come up against this Tilma. Acid has been spilled on it. Someone had attempted to blow this up, and there is a cross. You can see the cross was completely bent all the way over, but the Tilma did not get damaged. Absolutely amazing. So, I brought all these things up because if we believe in the miracle of Jesus, we believe in the miracle of Guadalupe, that she's been seen throughout the world. She's been respected and seen by the Vatican. I just think it's incredible to consider. The name Guadalupe is from the Arabic word wadi, which means river, and the Latin word lupus, which means wolf. So why was it Mexico? What was it about that place, that spot, that time that individual, their people, what was it about the fact that her cloak matched the night sky in that spot that she came up down to us here? I think that's to me, that's the faith piece, and that's where we all have to kind of decide for ourselves. We are all going to have different beliefs about why she came, what her purpose in showing herself to us and to this nation of people who revere and love and respect her and have shown the whole world what it is to revere, love, and respect her. And through the last few years, it helped me come back around to an understanding of faith, even if, this woman is not, you know, God to you. I think there's still a queen of divine femininity, and she gave birth to the divine masculine. And, that her day is 12/12, and that's a portal. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend, rate the episode, subscribe for new episodes, comment if you would like. And we're working on releasing every week now on Tuesdays. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week.